the world is changing. And if we do not start looking at what the art of the possible is with everything autonomous, not just things in the air, the West will lose. Like, full stop.
All players, slow down, active, bullseye, 1327, for tactical. Lights on.
Man, that was painful, Jake. I can't believe my audio and video issues continue. The world hates me.
It never fails, man. We've been doing this for what, 2 years now? Something like that?
Yeah, I'll get it right sometime. Welcome to The Verge. We make sense of defense in an enjoyable way. I got Jake here co-hosting. I'm going to let him take the lead today. Before we get started, make sure that you like, follow, subscribe. Do what you got to do. Help the show grow. Spread the word. All right.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Well, we are joined today by my friend Dan Magy, the CEO and founder of Firestorm. But before we get into Dan's company and Firestorm a little bit more, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to Firestorm?
I've kind of always been an entrepreneur. I didn't learn until my 20s you could get people to give you money to start businesses. And since we figured that out, kind of haven't stopped. I really enjoy it. I accidentally started what became a defense company in 2015. Started a counter-UAS system business to protect sports stadiums. Naval Special Warfare found it, took it to Mosul, northern Iraq, Syria during the ISIS fight because they were using DJIs over there, and kind of never looked back. We didn't know what we were doing. Then we raised a bunch of money and hired some people who did know how to sell to the government. And once we kind of understood the playbook, we did really well. That business ended up getting bought at the end of 21. Told my wife I'd be retired for 6 months. I lasted 5 weeks. And in the build up to the war in Ukraine, we thought about the idea of Firestorm, which was to basically bring this type of asymmetric technology both to the US and its allies. Our motto is to democratize the sky. And when you think about what the early stages of the Ukraine war were, you had this 40,000 armored vehicles and tanks stuck in mud north of the country.
Yep.
Like, if the FPV fight was today, the war would have been done in the first, 48 hours. It would have just blown everything up. So I like to say we were like rather clairvoyant, but we're basically now building Group 1, Group 2, and working on Group 3 product right now as well to kind of help both the US and its allies have affordable technologies.
So you went from counter-UAS to building UAS. So I guess we could say you went to the dark side. I don't know. I guess it depends on who's using them. How was that transition for you?
I need to have a full disclosure. I am not an engineer by training, right? I have degrees in political science and history as undergrad, and then a master's degree in international relations from grad school. But I've worked around deep tech for a while. And so when I saw just how overwhelming these asymmetrical technologies were that ISIS was using, they were early adopters, I guess I'd say, with the whole flying IED thing. I remember even when we started the business and we were working with the guys who were downrange, it'd be incredible if the US had this type of technology that was disposable. I mean, because they'd pull out the drones that the DoD was buying, and they'd literally turn them on, and our jammer would just nuke them. I mean, the DJI stuff was light years ahead of what was on the market at that time. And so I'd like to say it's kind of a little bit of a natural progression, if you know what I mean. If you kind of have a good idea of why or how RF jamming works and its limitations, you can kind of skate to where the puck's going, which is a world where you have to assume no RF is the table stakes. And then how do you build platforms to carry out your missions that will survive in those environments? So I don't know. I think it's kind of allows me to be uniquely qualified in thinking about potentially how to solve the problem.
You said us. How many employees do you have at the team now?
We have almost 40.
Oh, wow.
It's been a pretty quick growth, and we're still hiring right now.
Everyone that's on the show, for founders, CEOs, when they come on the show, I always ask, what's the origin story of the company name, Firestorm? Where'd you get it from?
We're just playing around with names. And I just thought it'd It made a lot of sense. I mean, there's nothing biblical or anything like that, but all of our platforms have storm names. Tempest, El Nino, hurricane, cloudburst. Um,
Hey, those other two, I don't see them on your website. Is that on purpose?
they're coming.
Okay.
There are 1,000,001 small UAS companies right now. So what made you guys decide to start a company? Like, what was the thinking that you guys could be different? And how do you differentiate? And what is a pretty crowded market?
Yeah, we have a really heavy focus on manufacturing. So how simple can you make this drone to assemble, disassemble, use in the field? We're not building quadcopters. We're building our workhorse products, a Group 2 drone. And then the second thing I would say is that we've invested heavily and continue to invest heavily into an integration team. Our vision is this drone is going to be the truck. It's the chassis, and you can put whatever you want on it. That modification to like the vision of the company came after we watched drone after drone after drone where the hardware was basically locked, get jammed in Ukraine and become a paperweight. And so we wanted to build kind of an ecosystem around the platform so that as the fight changes, or say you don't have access to the supply chain you wanted, you can still get the drone in the air. Because I truly believe that is what the future of UAS in a contested environment is going to be about. What do I use to get the drone into the air? I don't think we're going to get to enjoy the air supremacy we had during GWAT. And so this is kind of our answer to it. And it's an iterative process. We've done somewhere between 25 and 50 integrations and about 150 folks that want to get on our platform. And so the more of these we do, the simpler it becomes to build the SDK and the middleware and kind of the power management systems required to pull that off.
You're doing a great series on LinkedIn right now. I think everyone should check it out. The Drone Wars posts that you make.
Just real quick, do you have a full-time job? Because I always I don't know how many times a day I see you post a video from Ukraine. I mean, it's great consumption on LinkedIn, but I'm like, man, don't you have a company to run? Or how do you get all this footage?
We got friends, we got Telegram, we got Twitter. I spend about an hour a day on it, but it really serves a reinforcing purpose here, which is the world is changing. And if we do not start looking at what the art of the possible is with everything autonomous, not just things in the air, the West will lose. Like, full stop. Just the Iran, China, Russia, I guess, and little North Korea. I don't know if that'd be is that a triumph? What's that? What's 4? Where's my Berkeley grad over there to give me the
I don't
number?
know.
But that group
A
over
quadrangle of hate.
there we go. Yeah. But they're sharing information, they're sharing TPTPs, they're building factories in each other's country. Like, they basically have industrialized the use of these drones, and you're starting to see, for instance, Hezbollah use technology and tactics that were developed in Russia on the North Israel border to completely overwhelm and destroy Iron Dome sites and counter-UAS sites on the border. You're seeing the Wagner-supported groups across, the endless civil wars we have in Africa that we don't talk enough about. You're starting to see drones being used in these theaters. So the point of this is that is the battle lab of the world right now. And I don't know if because of how slow we move when we build stuff, or maybe hubris, we think it won't affect us, or that we'll be able to catch up. We won't. And so we need to be kind of taking steps now and buying down risk. And I think it's an incredible mission, and it makes it really easy to hire people and for people to get behind, because we can and will do better. And we know that as a small company in defense, there are very big waves you have to get over. I don't think anything in life is insurmountable, but I'm also a taxpayer, and this country's been really great for me. So I think we want to do whatever we can to help support Western norms and values and democracies around the world.
We'll have a link in the show notes. Please follow Dan's LinkedIn. If you just click on his thing and go back, just call it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you will see at least one counter tactic or tactical evolution in a video. So I've probably seen, just following you for a few months, Dan, I've probably seen 10, 15 tactical evolutions just in your LinkedIn feed. And that's just what you see. That's not what's actually going on. So, you think about the iceberg model, all the stuff we can't see under the waterline of all the other stuff that's happening around, we just haven't seen it, captured in a video, put on the internet, and then put in front of our eyes. So highly recommend follow his feed to keep a pulse on. It really helps keep me grounded in what's going on out there. So thanks for putting in that hour a day. I find it really, really valuable.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like you nailed it. It is in 2 or 3 week evolutions. You know what I mean? I think 2 months ago we saw the first video of like a Ukrainian air warden taking out a Russian observation drone, and now they've really figured out using RF sensing from the ground and in the air and radars, and then like basically shifts of, like, I just call them air wardens, who will go, once they know there's an observation drone in the air, they'll go run into it, and they've built special shape charges to like affect like a blast zone to knock these things out. I mean, that is unbelievable. That is in months.
2 months ago, we went from a stick on the end of a drone just being used to foul a propeller to custom designed shape charges.
I saw just 2 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, was the first digital camouflage on the top of a drone, so to protect it from high to low attacks from computer vision. You see it once, and then you're going to start seeing it everywhere, and it's going to be another sensor, another effector. Yeah, the tactical evolution and the technical evolution with those tactics is pretty amazing.
I'll tell you, this is fascinating. In this one Telegram feed I was in, they complained that this is the Russians. They complained that they used to be able to get 3, 4, 5 months out of these observation drones. Okay, a lot of them are not even lasting a flight at this point. That is in a matter of months, right? I mean, that's just showing you that, and then we'll have the next giant leap, right? I'll just say, like, being a dismounted soldier in Ukraine is probably the last thing in the world I'd wish upon my enemy right now. It is incredible. Like, it's just becoming a meat grinder, and it's artillery, mines, and FPVs being used in concert to really, like, to blow up 20 Russian tanks on an assault, or to attack, dugout positions. It's unbelievable. And so if we're not paying attention, right, I think we're at risk of having the cavalry meets machine gun moment as a country, and that would be really, really damaging for the life we all enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, on the dismounted soldier thing, around the company Slack the last couple of weeks, there's been a video of a Russian soldier like cowering in a trench. You hear the whirring of the high torque brushless motors overhead, getting closer and then going further away. And it's like the modern day suppression, the modern day machine gun fire. You just need a couple drones in the air. That sound is terrifying.
Yeah, I saw recently, I won't name the company, but they had an entire product line of just decoy drones. They don't have sensors, that they're dirt cheap, and it's simple because they just make noise and fly around, and everyone has been conditioned to run away from that and hide, versus, oh, it's just a little quadcopter, it's not going to do anything. So the entire culture is shifted, which is opening the market for all these other weird uses. Cardboard drones with purposely loud motors is actually like a capability now.
Totally. And so then what it does is it forces you to then change all the defensive systems and the postures you've created, because you're like, hey, I don't know if that's a threat or not, right? But I have to respond to it, because if it is a threat, then I'm not doing my job. You know what I mean? I mean, it's incredible. So
things are changing so fast, right? I mean, we go, now we've got counter drone drones, we've got thermite dropping drones, which we can talk about a little bit later if we want. Absolutely terrifying.
Ooh, thermite.
Yeah.
I saw it for the first time like 2 months ago, and then it disappeared for a while.
The horror show in my mind is, a dozen or 24 of those in New York City, and you have a firestorm that maybe kills millions of people. It's effectively a weapon of mass destruction for a few $1,000s instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars in the right or wrong use cases. But like, tabling that, this whole topic of how quickly the tactics and the technology are changing in the battlefield, like, is it an intractable problem? Like, how do we adapt fast enough without being like in the thick of it? Or do we really need to wait until we are personally involved in the conflict to have those like iterative adaptive cycles?
How much time do you have? Like, I think we have to start figuring out. There's a number of things here. Like, maybe we buy and then recompete programs in 2-year cycles or 3-year cycles, right? Maybe we do more testing events that are like kind of no shit real world things, right? Like, what if the new table stakes for a UAV test is all 2.4 and 5.8 waveforms are jammed? Okay, now you have to figure out how to use your drone. Which is, guys, those are Wi-Fi bands. Those are like, 2 of the 5 or 6 most popular, just commercially off the shelf, transmit and receive bands. But like, that would be a really cool test, right? And that's me maybe saying the quiet part aloud that not a lot of people are talking about. And I think it would be good for everybody to learn how to operate in these environments, mind you. And then the third thing I'd say is like, and this is more just structural, how do you take out the risk across the government so that people who have money will take risks on small companies? One of the biggest threats to, like, let's call it the innovation economy at DoD, is VCs have poured billions of dollars into this space. And if they don't start seeing contract wins, that money is going to dry up. And that has been free R&D money. That's free chicken, right? And so when I talk about that to Congress, it makes complete sense. And so I'm like, hey, maybe a sensible idea is add price competitiveness to this. How much money did this big company receive to build this product that they're going to sell to you at this price, right? Or out of every $1 spent, 10% of it, 15% of it has to go to a smaller company to, 1, de-risk a contract, and 2, create some competition, right? I mean, there's things we could do now to basically speed up the iterative process. But, these aren't new ideas. Like, people have been trying to get MOSA on a lot of like drones forever, but there's been no incentive from a bunch of the big companies to have a non-vendor locked hardware solution. So again, when you're actually going near to peer and not GWatt, there are PhDs and there are scientists on the other side who are going to adapt to the fight, right? And so how do we build systems that are adaptable, and maybe that means they're cheap. And so you got to have a bigger spread between the exquisite stuff, which will always exist, and then the cheap stuff that maybe overwhelms or causes their exquisite stuff to be expended. You know what I mean? And that's how I really think about this. And these are like very low risk, very low cost things we should be doing as a country.
If you go back to force design, the force design strategies, so that's how you like build a force, like a military. If you go back to like the 60s and 70s, the high-low mix from the Air Force became kind of a thing. And most people don't realize this, but like that was not purposeful. That was the result of just acquisitions and things that had changed over time. No one set out to build a high-low force. They did it with they call it the F-15, the F-16. They try to do it with the F-22 and F-35. Like those are just mirrors of what they started with. That was not the point to build a high-low force. It devolved into that because it turns out you can only have so much money to put in the exquisite things, and then now you have to hedge. Okay, now how do I spread the gap to have a capability that's distributed, and I can sustain it and operate in a variety of different conditions? So if we had 10,000 F-22s, that wouldn't solve a whole lot of problems. It would be awesome, I'm sure, but it wouldn't solve all the world's problems. So the force design and force structure and the high-low mix, it'd be a curious thought experiment to go through a high-low mix. If you had a clean sheet of paper today, what that would look like. And so you'd have to make your bets. You have, $1 of the dollar, how many pennies go in each bucket, and then how do you actually build a force from scratch? So to your point, you incentivize, and a lot of the things that are happening are results of force modernization or sustainment of things that have already been built over time.
Yep. And
so no one really has a clean sheet of paper to actually start over, and everyone has commitments. I've seen when I used to work in the Pentagon, someone once told me, everyone's arguing over like 3% of the budget, like 97% of the budget, the Pentagon is obligated for multi-year contracts and obligations. Like you can't touch it.
Yep.
So everyone is arguing over 3% of the pie, when really like that is not the change that's going to matter in the long term, right?
Totally agree.
So let's talk about good stuff. Let's go back to Firestorm for just a second. So Tempest is your first one. Well, there's a bunch of things that are interesting about Tempest. The one is the modular propulsion. So it looks, based on all the other ones I've seen, by having a turbine-powered drone of that class, it makes it considerably faster than the other things that are kind of flying around. You trade speed for endurance, though. We're going from like prop to turbine. But it's your product. So can you talk a little bit about that, of like how that is a differentiator?
Yeah. So Mike, it starts with a turbine, but the beauty of the whole product is that it takes props as well. So we've built one SKU that literally has an empennage you can click on or click off that allows you to go from high speed to loiter. And we think that that's a fundamental game changer because it allows you then to, like, again, not have to buy one drone for each mission. So we think that's crucial. And then we're also working on some EDF stuff too, so that if you want to, maybe go a little quieter, you don't sound like a little rocket, or you don't sound like a two-stroke lawnmower in the air. So one, we think that's a differentiator, and we've spent a lot of money building an autonomy suite that allows you to like make that shift easier and to then kind of naturally adjust center of gravity as you put different payloads onto that as well. So it's not only multiple propulsion, but it's kind of like a payload space with a very simple to use SDK and middleware. And we're just saying this, we're going to build some native capabilities ourselves, right? But we're also going to put everybody's stuff on it, right? So do we want do we want HiveMind? Do we want EpiSci? Do we want Autonodyne? Do we want any of that for autonomy? We can run that on our chip stack, right? In our software code. But that's like where we're heavily investing, and we think it's a fundamental differentiator for our business, which is kind of one drone that can do multiple missions, and that we're making it simple so that you could have different payload swaps, as well as like a usability standpoint to make sure that all happens. Because I just remember like SRT1 during the counter-UAS days would tell me like, oh, I had to pay like $10 million to put this payload on a Scan Eagle. And I'd be like, dude, that's like, 3 months of work with like 2 folks. You know what I mean?
That's a really good point. So you talk about NRE, non-recurring engineering.
Yep.
That's the cost to integrate these things on. Well, then the second order effect of that is you now have like your sunk cost fallacy. You're kind of committed because you've already spent that money. And then, oh, by the way, because the way it's architected, you also have switching costs. And so you get hit again when you try to rip it out and put something else in, and then you have to pay the NRE all over again. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. If you're in that kind of business model, turns out that's not the one that the end user actually wants.
Yeah. And again, like the challenge we face is like when you try and be everything to everybody, like they don't know what they need. Yeah. So we do have kind of specific build outs, if you will, for different mission sets, right? But like just at the basic understanding of like what our value prop is, that has to be core to the company. Like our drone is on its way to being like a NASCAR or an F1, where you'll have a bunch of different integrated stickers on it, because we think that there's a lot of value in kind of being that platform that can be multi-mission and easy to interact with and easy to integrate on.
I've seen little landing gears on the Tempest in some of the videos you have online. So that thing takes off and lands, so you can just reuse it?
What a lot of those years we're showing you too are just our kind of our test vehicle, right? So okay. It has a landing gear version, it has a non-landing gear version, but one of the great things of building a drone company in San Diego, as I'm sure you know as well, is there's a lot of places to fly, which is awesome. So we do extensive flying. Like we fly, we'll call it some weeks hundreds of times, and that lets us basically have an iterative cycle where we can, continue to improve the product at lightning speed. So that's just one of the landing gears, one of the ways in which we can pull that off, right?
Just for the folks at home who are thinking of starting a new company, how many times have you crashed a Tempest while you're iterating on the product and learning?
No comment, dude. No, we've crashed it. I don't know, over the last couple of years. I was thinking of actually just making a blooper video. You got to be careful when you do that, though, as a small company, because the big guys get to crash their planes all the time. The small guys, you got to like establish yourself for a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, we've had times where we've gone through like, well, we didn't crash for 9 months, and then we've had a time where we've crashed a couple birds in a week. I mean, that's the iterative process. You know what I mean? My kind of like message to the team is, if you're not pushing the limits, then what the heck are you doing here? you got to balance that with not being foolish, right? But still, like, we've built a really cool integration and training pipeline using a couple different platforms. Like, we obviously do the digital stuff in the sim, and then we have a smaller bird, and then we have like the actual birds. And that's allowed us to kind of de-risk a ton of integrations, a ton of new software, all that jazz.
On that note, SpaceX, famous for crashing a bunch of rockets and everyone's kind of laughing at them. And then now you look at them and you go, wow, you want, yeah, you learn a lot from the fly fix fly is one of the things that I use on my other job. You got to get stuff in the air. You got to put it out in the real world and, make contact with the enemy, which is, reality in this case. Yeah. So a paper airplane flies great. Not until you build it and fly it, you actually see what it does.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I think, economic situation with that size drone where just the economics, like, well, I can do, simulated tests and put it in a wind tunnel and log, 2 months of time and get all this data, or we can go out and fly it and put it in these, edge of the envelope things and see what happens and collect that data. And just the amount of time you save, time is money. You have a company of 40 people. If you save 2 months of runway by learning something and you crash 2 drones, like the cost benefit just makes sense, right?
100%, man. Like, I totally agree. And so again, it comes down to like, let's not be foolish, but let's push the envelope, right? And sometimes that line can be kind of fine, but I feel like we've got a bunch of professionalism like around the flight team we've built, and that we continue to grow because we just think that flying is the lifeblood of the business. So we got to be flying constantly.
I'm going to go ahead and pivot back to something you said earlier about VCs investing in defense. So Jake, you invested in Firestorm from Dan's pitch. So Dan, what did you say to convince Jake to invest? And then Jake, why do you believe what Dan told you is right?
What is it, like the matchmaker game or like the marriage game? What's that old game show? Where...
Tell me, how did you meet? What did you have for dinner?
Did he give you a kiss on the first date? Yeah, so my vision was basically this. Like, I think that UAVs are going to be a huge space. And I think before the Ukrainian war, it was estimated to be like an $8 billion a year industry by the end of 2040. And now it's estimated to be by 2030. Now it's estimated to be a $40 billion industry by the end of 2030. My thought was that a bunch of the big companies in this space won't be able to move fast enough. Part of that was because I talked to a ton of people on their R&D teams there. Hint, there's not a lot of R&D happening at big companies. And I just thought that it's really going to come down to like, what do we call it? Attritable mass. Not attritable mass that it's cheap, attritable mass in the way that you will be able to do resupply. And we're seeing that right now. Like, so a month ago, Ukraine was saying, we are using 10,000 drones a month, okay? Then Zelensky 2 weeks ago made the cat's out of the bag. We're using 100,000 a month. And then earlier this week, he said we will have the capability to use 2 million drones a year. So we've gone from 10,000 to, 80,000 drones a month, because that's just the state of the war, right? That was kind of the guess early on. I didn't think it would go this fast, but also when you're fighting an army that's 5 times your size, right? You kind of do what you got to do to survive. So that was kind of my pitch, right? It was big vision. Here's the tools and the playbook we used at the last one, or we learned at the last one. I think we can do it bigger, faster this time.
Full disclosure, the first time I talked with Dan and I heard the pitch, I was like, yeah, but there's a million people trying to do small UAS, attritable, cheap systems. I mean, this is like pre-replicator, but we're like on the cusp of a replicator announcement, right? Like this is like the zeitgeist. I was like, yeah, I like Dan, but I don't see the differentiation. Then the second time we talked, Dan's dog Walter was in the background, adorable, enormous Saint Bernard. Saint Bernard, right?
Saint Bernard.
Dan was freaking out because his backyard was currently in a state of being flooded, but he handled it with such a plum that, like it was just a good a good sign from a founder who is taking a meeting under stress and like dealing with home disaster at the same moment. But really what got me wasn't the drones themselves, the UAS. It's expeditionary manufacturing, which we've danced around, but we haven't really talked about on the pod yet. But that's, I think, the thing that sets Firestorm apart.
What is expeditionary manufacturing? I see 3D printing and cost and speed and adaptability and a whole bunch of buzzwords on the website, and some pretty cool pictures, by the way, of some connexes. So tell us about it. What is that?
Mike, you're almost there. So you put the 3D printer in the connex and you move it towards the fight.
Put the thing in the thing and it moved the thing. Okay.
It's substantially more. Like we've spent over 7 figures of IRAD building this out. So basically what we have is we have this mobile manufacturing solution, and we have the assembly area that's like industrial grade that we've been able to kind of package into something that you can send anywhere in the world and set up in less than a day and start printing drones. Why is that good? Well, it's good because contested logistics are a no shit problem that we face. We can barely resupply the Ukrainians. So what are we going to do with a number of island chains? And then the second reason for that is the whole world has given up on the US's ability to be the supplier to democracies. How do you know? Well, I've had 50 countries reach out to me and ask me about this expeditionary manufacturing cell because they felt that before the war in Ukraine, they were 2 to 3 years behind in the UAV game. Now they feel like they're a decade. Okay? So what we want to basically be able to do is you have a blueprint, you have the manufacturing solution, and then you have the software that allows for in-country modification, deliver the entire package to customers. And then it's either you're supplying the parts and the materials that go in, or you can localize supply chain, because most countries in the world, because of how the US has responded to Ukraine, have passed this made in X country rule by 2030, where 50% of their defense goods have to be built domestically. So what we're saying is, for pennies on the dollar, we can either with an OpEx or a CapEx approach, bring a factory to you. And so that's the big plan for like overseas. Within the DoD, this allows you to, one, solve your problems for contested logistics. 2, kind of simplify the drone manufacturing at the edge talk like that I was talking about earlier around attritability. We think it's a resupply like discussion, not a cost discussion, even though we build pretty cheap drones, cheap but high quality. But I mean, like, you know what I mean. And then the second thing is, like, let's say you're in an island chain, okay, and you only have 10 drones. They could be DJIs, they could be Switchblades, they could be VBATs. What doesn't matter? Like, if you don't have the ability to resupply that, right, or rebuild those now become exquisite products because you can't afford to lose them. In the conflict we're seeing, think back to the observation discussion we had where the Russians are saying they went from flying something every day for 5 months to not even getting through a full flight. That's what we're going to be facing. And so our whole idea here is put the means of production closer to the X. And then we have some other stuff that I can't talk about to help you make a better decision maybe on how you build that drone or what you put on that drone to carry out a mission. So to be honest, that's been the thing that has gotten people the most excited, is the expeditionary manufacturing and the ability to kind of rapidly scale production kind of anywhere in the world.
I've been on a couple panels the past few years, and we talk about moving from manned to unmanned. You decouple risk to mission and risk to force. And so I don't have to risk the people, and now it's just a matter of like risking the mission. But the other part of that conversation, and I've touched on it before in the past, and I'm glad that the way that you framed it is pretty compelling. So when you look at risk of loss of like a platform, the calculus is, if I put that thing in harm's way and that thing goes down, there's the attrition, there's the consequence of the attrition, so unable to complete the mission, and then there's the reconstitution. And so if you don't have ability to reconstitute a force, your risk goes from low to high. Like an F-22 is a great example. There's only 186 of them left in the world, something like that. They didn't buy enough to actually accept the risk to deploy them with any meaningful capability. And so they're kind of held in reserves, because if one of them goes down, there's no line building more of them. They're just gone forever. Same thing with B2s. There's only 20 in the world that are flying around still. And again, if you lose one of them, that's a significant emotional event that you can't recover from.
We lost one.
Yeah, but we had 21, I think, and it went back to 20.
19, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. So yeah, but to your point, because you can't reconstitute your force, and if you can, it takes, these bigger aircraft take years to build one. It takes a second to shoot it down and 2 years to put it back together. That's not the side of the team you want to be on. So yeah, the reconstitution and the attrition are definitely coupled when you look at risk and putting things in the harm's way.
So it's funny you say that, and there's one other thing, Mike, that tends to come up. My co-founder Chad is in JSOC for 18 years. He's a PJ. I think he lives in your neighborhood, probably down there in Egland still.
I think actually he does.
Yeah, but he would tell me, like, when they'd be training for missions, okay, they'd have all these platforms, and they were exquisite platforms, right? And guys were so afraid to fly or use them sometimes because if they crashed them, they'd get their ass chewed out, that when they actually got the thing in combat, where it would be okay technically to crash it because, you're on a mission, people didn't know what to do.
Right.
So, I mean, you laid it out in a really good way, right? These are the things, like, we've built our entire kind of force around these technologies that are kind of cumbersome to build. And if you lose them, then it's like, okay, well, where are you? You know what I mean? Like, if we lost 20 or 30 F-22s in a conflict, we'd probably just not put any more up in the air. Do you know what I mean? Because what is going to take us a decade to rebuild those 30?
John Boyd read a paper in like the, late 80s, 88 maybe, 89. And he did some math looking at historic campaigns. And I think he said it was like 3%. Like 3% attrition to a force was like meaningfully that you can continue a campaign with the current strategy or plan. And then you look at World War II as like the one standout. When you look at the 8th Air Force, if you've seen Masters of the Air, that was part of that.
Yep.
They were able to sustain that kind of battle damage and attrition because at the peak, the United States was delivering 1,000 bombers a month into theater for the European campaign to continue. So because they had the ability to accept the attrition and continue the campaign, because they had these factories pumping out these bombers, obviously it's a big platform and you're talking about people in them and it's a long time ago, but there's definitely an analogy there. And I can't help but notice the painting or the poster you have behind you. And I know that's it looks like a destroyer in the picture, but it kind of reminded me of it, which is why I kind of went all the way back to the bombers and the 8th Air Force and those formations.
Yep, it's the I'm gonna get you the exact name of it, but it was the end of World War II, the surrender of Japan. That was everybody flying over Tokyo Bay, but it proves the point, and that's why I keep it right in camera shot. Like, this is what we used to be able to do, and for a lot of reasons, the peace dividends, the Last Supper, all the stuff we all know about, right? With the consolidation of the industry and the turning to exquisite platforms that are, built and funded over with 30 years of sustainment, like we've kind of moved away from that. At the same time, when COTS technology has gotten cheaper and better, that allows you to deploy in mass. And I think we're still struggling as a country understanding just what that means, and a shifting landscape with, what does putting NVIDIA boards with open source software mean on a bunch of drones? What is, harnessing the power of buying tens of thousands of brushless motors from tons of, factories across China, Taiwan, other places now too, right? And then rapidly assembling, like, what does that do? I mean, I look at some of the material we're kind of given Taiwan, and I'm like, and then I also look at them building their own FPV army, which they're now openly doing, and I'm like, man, if a conflict started in a year or two, I bet you Taiwan will have a couple 100,000 drones for the cost of a couple exquisite systems sitting in warehouses with teams ready to go. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really this changing of the guard moment, in my opinion.
I hope they have that a couple years from now. I hope they have it now. Just pump the brakes real quick. a quick shift in topics. So everything we're talking about right now, we are, to some degree, we're playing war. We're playing a video game, right? We're not at war, the three of us. We're not in Ukraine on the front lines. On the other hand, the US and Germany just foiled an assassination plot against the CEO of Rheinmetall, alleged assassination attempt. Do you and Chad and the Firestorm team, do you ever think about personal risk in this sort of context? And then I guess a related question, how do you think about counterintelligence as someone who's building a defense company? Do you ever get approached by people you suspect of being agents of a foreign power? And how do you think about that, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, for the second one, like, that's usually pretty straightforward. I mean, we're putting like even more stringent kind of security things in place around the technology we use. We have companies, we have government supporting for some of that stuff. I also have a ton of people from China on LinkedIn trying to add me. I usually don't add them. But yeah, I mean, these are probably real concerns that most people have. I mean, I think you guys saw a bunch of the Anduril execs got sanctioned a couple weeks ago after they delivered that $300 million order to the island. You know, that stuff is real, and it's like just another sign that, in my opinion, the norms and values we appreciate are under attack. You know, I think this business is a response to the world that has dramatically changed over the last 5 or 6 years. I got to wrap it up, guys. I got to get on a call at 4. Sorry.
Thanks for your time, Dan. I really appreciate it. We're going to have you back on because we always ask a magic wand question, the things that you'd want to change if you had a magic wand. But that's our way to get you back on the show for next time. So, Dan, thanks for your time. That's the show. See ya.